In the year 301, a Roman emperor passed a simple law. Anyone who sold goods above the government price would be put to death. But not just the seller. The buyer would also die. Both sides of the deal could lose their heads over a single everyday transaction. This edict set price caps on over 1,400 goods and services, reaching into every single corner of daily life across the empire. From the price of eggs to the price of a lion, from barber wages to the cost of shipping cargo by sea across the whole Mediterranean, and teacher salaries, exactly 200 denarii per month per student, no more, no less, written plainly into the law of the state. The edict had a grand Latin name, Edictum de Pretis Rerum Venalium, which translates roughly to the Edict on Maximum Prices of Goods. It was carved into stone and erected at over 40 sites across the empire, from Greece to Egypt, from Turkey to the North African coast. The message was clear. This was not a suggestion, this was the law. Carved in stone meant forever, and no one was allowed to ignore it. But just 4 years later, that edict carved into eternal stone vanished from daily life entirely, as if it never existed for a single day. And the emperor who wrote it, the most powerful man on earth at that time, ended up retiring to the countryside to grow cabbages instead. This is the story of the most ambitious attempt at price control in the entire recorded history of the ancient Western world we know today. A lesson that 1700 years later we keep repeating, keep debating, and somehow still have not truly learned anything from. Why did the most powerful ruler on earth, governing tens of millions of people, need the death penalty just for everyday buying and selling? Why did a perfectly crafted edict, carved in stone and posted all across the empire, fall apart completely in just 4 short years? And Roman teachers, the people whose pay was fixed by the state for every subject they taught, how did they actually survive all of this? To understand why an emperor needed such extreme measures, we need to go back 50 years to when everything started falling apart. In the year 235, Rome entered the darkest period in its long history, an era now known as the crisis of the 3rd century. Over 50 years, 26 emperors rose and fell. On average, each sat on the throne for less than 2 years before being removed. Most did not die of old age. They were stabbed, overthrown, poisoned, or killed by their own troops on the battlefield without any warning. Civil wars erupted non-stop. Generals fought each other for the throne, while barbarian tribes kept attacking and pushing across the borders. Plagues swept the empire and killed millions. Trade routes collapsed, cities crumbled into ruins, and the population shrank dramatically. To pay the soldiers and fund the endless wars, emperor after emperor chose the fastest fix they knew: mint more coins and hope for the best. But the treasury was empty with no silver left. So what did they do? They did what we now call debasement, the oldest trick in the book. They diluted the coins. Slowly cut the real silver in each denarius, replacing it with copper and cheaper metals, a little more each year. Under Augustus, a denarius held nearly 100% pure silver, heavy in the hand and shining bright like a freshly polished mirror. By the year 268, a denarius contained barely 0.5% of silver. The rest was just copper with a thin coat of fake shine. Put simply, the empire's money lost 99.5% of its real metal value, becoming little more than worthless scrap. When money loses its real worth, what follows is entirely inevitable. Prices of everything start climbing wildly beyond anyone's control. Under Augustus, inflation was about 0.7% a year, a normal rate that nobody had any reason to worry about at all. By the early 4th century, that number had surged to 35% a year, and some estimates suggest it went even higher than that. Ordinary people lost all faith in money. They went back to bartering like ancient times, trading grain for cloth, wheat for olive oil. Soldiers demanded pay in gold or goods because copper coins bought nothing at market, and if their demands were not met, they would mutiny. And who caused this mess? The government blamed greedy merchants, the ones supposedly jacking up prices to profit from people's suffering. But here is the question no one asked out loud. Who debased the currency in the first place? Who printed money for 50 straight years? In the year 284, a soldier named Diocletian, born to freed slaves, rose through the ranks and became the new emperor of Rome. He surveyed an empire breaking from within, economy in ruins, army on edge, borders under siege, and decided something had to change. He reformed the military and split the empire into 4 parts ruled by 4 men, a system called the Tetrarchy, to govern more effectively. He issued a new silver coin called the Argentius, attempting to rebuild trust in a currency system that had been wrecked for 50 years. But inflation refused to stop. The new coin was not enough to undo the damage, and Diocletian knew he needed something far more radical. And at the end of the year 301, he landed on an idea he was sure would save the empire: fix the price of everything in Roman life. The Edict on Maximum Prices was born at the end of 301, and it was no gentle document. It was a declaration of war on the market. Right in the preamble, Diocletian blamed what he called the boundless greed of merchants exploiting honest, hard-working Roman citizens. He compared traders to the barbarians threatening the borders, arguing both were enemies of the empire and both deserved harsh punishment. The edict listed price caps for over 1,400 goods, services, and wages for every profession, detailed to an astonishing degree. And buried in that long list was one section few people talk about: the wages set by the state for teachers at every level of education. Elementary teachers, the ones who taught kids to read and write, got 50 denarii per month per student, the lowest of all teacher wages. Math teachers earned a bit more, 75 denarii per month per student, still quite modest compared to other professions on the list. Literature and geometry teachers jumped to 200 denarii, 4 times the pay of those teaching kids basic reading at primary schools. But the top earners were rhetoric teachers. 250 denarii, the best paid of all teachers anywhere in the entire Roman Empire. Rhetoric teachers made 5 times what elementary teachers earned. 5 times. The gap between 2 teaching jobs was staggeringly large. This reflected Roman values perfectly. Rhetoric was the key skill of aristocrats, lawyers, politicians, and anyone who wanted real power. But teaching kids to read and write at the basic level? That was seen as low-status work, the kind no one would choose if they had options. To put it in perspective, a bushel of wheat, about 8 litres, cost 30 denarii under the edict, the most basic food of everyday life. An elementary teacher with just 1 student would earn less than 2 bushels of wheat per month, barely enough to keep themselves alive on. But here is the strangest detail in the entire edict. A live lion was officially priced at 150,000 denarii on the nose, and 1 pound of Tyrian purple silk, the most luxurious fabric in the empire, cost exactly the same as that lion, down to the last coin. How detailed was this edict? It set shipping rates for cargo by sea from Alexandria to Rome, broken down by the type of goods being moved. And to make sure everyone obeyed, Diocletian established the harshest penalty he could imagine: death for every single act of violation. Selling goods above the price in the edict, death. No exceptions, no reduced sentence, no appeal, and absolutely no chance of mercy at all. Buying above the set price also meant death, because the edict said buyers who paid more were enabling economic sabotage against the empire. Refusing to sell at all also meant death, because Diocletian wanted to make sure nobody could dodge the law by simply shutting their shop. The edict was carved on large stone slabs, erected at over 40 sites from Greece to Egypt, so every citizen could read and understand it. The most complete surviving copy was found at Aphrodisias, an ancient city in what is now the southwestern corner of Turkey we know today. Diocletian was supremely confident. He believed this was the perfect fix, that the edict would crush inflation and stabilize the empire. But reality outside the palace had a very different plan, and merchants did not respond the way that Diocletian had expected them to react. When news of the edict reached marketplaces across the empire, the first reaction from merchants was shock, then confusion, then real fear. But the next reaction was the one Diocletian never anticipated. Merchants began pulling all of their goods off the open market completely. The logic was simple. Sell at the government price and lose everything you own. Sell above the price cap and lose your head on the spot. So the only solution was obvious. Sell nothing at all. Close up shop, hide your goods away, and wait for this madness to eventually pass. Lactantius, a writer who lived during the time of Diocletian, recorded exactly what happened next, and his words still resonate today. He wrote that blood was shed over the most trivial and worthless of things, that people were killed over a few denarii difference in a sale. He wrote that no one dared bring goods to market anymore, and the shortage of supply grew far worse than anything before the edict existed. Merchants chose to let their goods rot in storage rather than sell at the mandated price, because selling meant losing everything anyway. Black markets exploded across the empire. Deals moved into the shadows, behind closed doors, well beyond the reach of any imperial guard. Gold prices in denarii surged 250% because everyone wanted to hold something real instead of worthless copper coins. The edict was designed to tame inflation, stabilize prices, and protect the poor from exploitation by merchants driven by unchecked greed. But in practice, it made inflation far worse. Goods vanished from shelves, black markets spread everywhere, and the poor suffered even more. The cure was worse than the disease. That sums up the largest price control experiment the ancient world ever witnessed in a single line. By 305, just 4 years after the edict was issued with great ceremony and confidence, it had been ignored almost completely. The stone tablets inscribed with the edict still stood tall in public squares, their Latin text still sharp and legible under the sun, but nobody read them anymore. Nobody obeyed. The edict became decoration for town squares, and the stones became perches for passing birds. Stone is eternal, but law is not. Perhaps that is the most expensive lesson Diocletian accidentally carved into rock for future generations. So what did Diocletian do after all of this? How did he respond when his greatest plan collapsed before his eyes and he could do nothing? He did something no Roman emperor before him had ever dared to even consider, let alone carry out at any point in the history of the empire. And it began on the 1st of May in the year 305, when Diocletian stood before his army one final time with red and tearful eyes. On the 1st of May, 305, Diocletian stood before thousands of soldiers in Nicomedia, his eyes red and swollen from crying. He declared he was too old, too weak, and too exhausted to keep ruling the empire, that his health would no longer allow him to carry on. And then he did the unthinkable. He removed the imperial purple cloak from his shoulders and voluntarily abdicated, becoming a commoner. He was the first and only Roman emperor in history to willingly surrender the throne, giving up absolute power with nobody forcing his hand. He left the capital heading south to a palace he built himself in Split, on the Dalmatian coast of what is now modern-day Croatia. And there, the emperor who once ruled tens of millions spent his remaining years doing something remarkably simple. He grew vegetables. A few years later, when civil war erupted again and the empire teetered on the edge of collapse, envoys were sent begging him to come back. Diocletian listened and gave a reply that people have quoted for 1700 years because it is so perfectly wise and deeply human. He said, "If you could see the cabbages I have grown with my own hands, you would never dare ask me to do this ever again in your lives." He died in 311 in his vegetable garden at Split, far removed from all the power and glory of the empire he once commanded. And the edict that fixed teacher pay and everything else? Forgotten. It took Emperor Constantine's currency reform in the 310s. Constantine did not control prices. He created the gold Solidus, a coin people trusted, and that stable money is what fixed the economy. Not through bans or death threats, not through edicts carved in stone, but through a single coin that people believed held real value. 1700 years later, we still ask the exact same questions Diocletian asked. How much should we pay a teacher for it to be enough? And history patiently keeps repeating the same old answer. Price controls by government decree are medicine, usually worse than the disease.